Mr. Tiller, you're saying it's hard to believe. All one has to do is read the daily papers and watch the news on TV, and one sees that most interracial crimes are committed by blacks against whites.
Well, to some extent that's true. On the other hand, I think that certainly the press in the United States is very, very concerned about not perpetuating negative stereotypes. And I think that this concern goes too far. There is a concern that unflattering news about non-whites not be given much treatment. I'll give you an example that has nothing to do with crime. The fact that there is very, very persuasive documentation that Martin Luther King plagiarized his doctor's thesis. This news was very carefully suppressed for quite a long time. It finally came out in a way that could not be denied, and there's actually quite an interesting book written on the subject that never got reviewed anywhere. On the other hand, the possibility that Thomas Jefferson had an affair with his black slave Sally Hemings, that, of course, is first-page news, front-page news. The fact that Martin Luther King may have been a plagiarist, that makes people uncomfortable. The fact that the third president may have been a hypocrite and slept with a woman from a race in which he had noted objections to, that, of course, is free game, very interesting, first-page news. I'll give you another example. This is a criminal example. At the time of the first trial of the police who beat Rodney King, while this trial was front-page news, there was another trial going on in Miami. It was the trial of a gentleman by the name of Hulon Mitchell. I doubt any of you in here know this name. He went by the name of Yahweh ben Yahweh, and he was the leader of a black sect based primarily on hatred of whites. To be a full-fledged member, you had to kill a white man. To prove that you had killed your white man, you had to present Mr. Mitchell with a finger or an ear that was cut off the cadaver. This trial was going on at exactly the same time. And the fact that probably none of you in this room know a thing about it goes to show you the kind of coverage it got. Well, reverse this situation. Imagine a group of whites murdering and mutilating blacks. You would get the kind of coverage that the Jasper killing quite appropriately got. But I think we cannot have double standards in this respect. And the fact that, as you say, if you look at the television, you get the impression, you certainly get the impression that there is an overwhelming amount of black crime. Well, this is something that people are uncomfortable talking about, and the kinds of statistics that I've just presented to you today are the kind that you are almost certainly unlikely to find mentioned the way they are mentioned in this report in any public way. Yes, sir.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your organization? Are you liberal, conservative? Do you have a website? You have a mission statement?
New Century Foundation. I beg your pardon?
Go ahead.
New Century Foundation does not have a website. As I said before, we were established in 1994, and when you put together a nonprofit organization, the IRS wants to know what it is about. Well, New Century Foundation is an educational organization whose purpose is to improve racial understanding by trying to get at the facts that underlie race relations. And this crime report is an example of the kind of work we do. What are the facts here? Rather than the emotion, rather than the expectation, what are the facts?
Can I follow up on that?
Yes, sir.
How do you feel presenting these facts will improve race relations?
Implied in your question, I believe, is the assumption that these sort of facts will not help race relations, and in fact it will make them worse. I think, first of all, it's absolutely important for us to found policy on truth rather than untruth, no matter how uncomfortable the truth may be. And as this gentleman pointed out, in effect, he was saying there's nothing surprising in your report, just turn on the television set. Well, I think that there are a lot of people out there who have some sense that there are a certain number of double standards in the way news about race is reported. I think that creates a certain amount of resentment. The people who are living in Miami, who knew about the Yahweh ben Yahweh, Hulon Mitchell trial, and then realized that nobody else in the country had heard about that. what were they liable to think? I think the truth about these things, reported and discussed, is far better for any kind of mutual understanding between the races than pretending that they don't exist or sweeping them under the carpet. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, but all right, so now we know the police is right.
I beg your pardon?
Racial profiling is okay because obviously it's based on sound statistical evidence, but what do we gain by that? I mean, I agree with the gentleman back there because, you know, your study seems to be the focus of your study seems to be very narrow. You haven't gone into the reasons why blacks might commit more crimes. And I think, you know, in order to draw conclusions and promote racial relations, you actually have to go into this, not just...
All right. Sure. Let me give you an example. Let's examine this shocking figure of 90%. 90% of interracial crime being committed by blacks against whites. Does that suggest a certain amount of racial animus? I think that it does. I think it cannot help but suggest that. This isn't an accidental fact. Why is there racial animus? I think that it is fed by the zeitgeist in the United States that requires that we explain every failing or disadvantage of a non-white group in terms of white wickedness. Black people essentially are taught from infancy that anything that goes wrong for them, or Hispanics, for example, is the fault of those wicked people over there. There was slavery, there was Jim Crow, there was lynching, there was segregation. We are constantly reminded of this. And if, after all, if you are taught from infancy that everything that goes wrong is on account of that group, racist bankers, racist teachers, racist police, racist newspapers, racist media, racist this, racist that, how can you help but eventually end up hating those people?
Are you generalizing this statement to say that all blacks are taught that those people are the responsible for committing those?
I think that by and large, not only blacks but whites as well. That is basically the point of departure of any discussion in the United States about race, namely that if something is going wrong for non-whites, it's the fault of white people, past or present. That is the unspoken assumption, and it's very difficult, and you get called all kinds of names. It's if you try to refute that point of view, and it seems to me that the kind of crime we're talking about here, hate crimes, interracial crime, that is the fruit of the kind of policy we have of explaining every possible black failure in terms of white wickedness. I think race relations would vastly improve if blacks were told, look, just like every other group in this country, you can be responsible for yourself. What if you were told, as I say, every time you turn around, those people out there are rubbing their hands in anticipation of finding some way to oppress you? How discouraging is that? No, I think that the kind of message that we are constantly sending to non-whites about the wickedness of whites is very bad for them and very bad for whites, and the kinds of numbers in this report are the kinds of things that result from it. Yes, there was another, yes, ma'am.
You talked about how Hispanics are not reported correctly, possibly as whites. Are you open to the possibility that there could be misreporting among African-American crime?
Well, I'm sure that there is.
Figures could be off.
Oh, well, my figures are the government's figures. Now, the government's figures, I'm sure there's a possibility of misreporting. The point is, though, in both the Uniform Crime Reports and the NCVS, the National Criminal Victimization Survey, Hispanics don't exist. The same is true for this hate crime report that I was telling you about. Hispanics are a victim category, but not a perpetrator category. They don't even exist. And so that, whereas American Indians and Eskimos, who are 1% of the population, there is a carefully maintained separate category for them. But this group that is now 13% of the population, and which, let's face it, in many important respects, considers itself a distinct group from non-Hispanic whites, it's as if these people don't exist, and they are included almost routinely with whites. Now, one of the things that I did to try to get a handle on Hispanic crime rates was go to state data from the state of California. That information is reproduced in your report as well. In California, they make the distinction between Hispanics and non-Hispanic whites. However, when they report that data to the federal government, they lump all Hispanics in with the whites. Now, does this make some sort of sense? I don't think so. If we're interested in ethnic relations, then it seems to me we should get our data correct. Now, obviously, sometimes in a survey report, maybe someone was attacked by a black and says he was attacked by a white or vice versa. But by and large, I think there's a certain amount of human error in those respects that's going to cancel each other out. The kinds of misreporting I'm talking about is this whole conceptual, I think, misguided conceptual notion that rules out Hispanics as any kind of perpetrator category at all. I think that's a completely different thing. Any other questions, please?